Okinawa, April 1945. Night draped itself over the ridges of Okinawa like a heavy shroud. The wind was still, the air thick with the sour scent of gunpowder and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere beyond the coral ridgeline, a lone Japanese sentry shifted his weight, clutching his Arisaka rifle tight against his chest. The darkness was his ally, or so he believed. Down in the valley below, a small detachment of U.S. soldiers crouched among the ruins of a sugarcane field. Each man's breath was shallow, their eyes hidden behind strange glass tubes connected to bulky power packs strapped across their backs. Through the green glow of their scopes, the night came alive. Shapes, movement, heat. The sentry stepped into view, unaware he had been seen minutes ago. A single, muffled crack broke the silence. He fell before he even heard the shot. To the Japanese defenders, it seemed like ghosts were hunting them, silent, invisible, precise. But it wasn't magic. It was technology. In that pitch-black night of Okinawa, the world's first combat night vision rifle, the American M3 infrared carbine, revealed itself to the enemy. And in that darkness, the future of warfare was born. April 1945. The Pacific War had reached its crescendo. From the smoking ruins of Iwo Jima to the volcanic slopes of Saipan, the U.S. island-hopping campaign had cut through Japan's defensive perimeter like a knife through silk. Okinawa, the largest of the Ryukyu Islands, was the last stepping stone before the Japanese home islands themselves. Its capture promised not just strategic advantage, but a glimpse at the war's ultimate conclusion. The island's landscape was both beautiful and lethal. Rolling hills, hidden valleys, and dense sugarcane fields provided natural cover. Caves carved into cliffs had become Japanese strongpoints, stocked with rifles, grenades, and unwavering determination. For the Japanese, Okinawa was more than a military objective. It was a test of survival, a place to exact vengeance on the Americans who had relentlessly pushed through their Pacific defenses. The defenders, under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, prepared for a fight that would not be measured merely in territory gained or lost. They relied on night ambushes, infiltration, and the intimate knowledge of their island's terrain. Patrols moved silently, listening for the faintest rustle in the grass, trusting in the dark to shield them from the overwhelming firepower of U.S. forces. Across the beaches, the Americans were assembling the largest amphibious invasion of the Pacific theater. Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr. oversaw a force that numbered over 180,000 men. A mixture of Army and Marine divisions trained to breach fortified positions with precision and speed. The U.S. relied on combined arms, artillery, naval bombardment, armor, and infantry working in unison to neutralize Japanese resistance. Each step inland was a calculated gamble, each hill a potential death trap. Weapons reflected the priorities of this final push. The standard M1 Garand dominated rifle squads, its 8-round clip and semi-automatic fire a step above Japanese bolt-action Arisakas. Thompson submachine guns rattled in close quarters, while bazookas and flamethrowers cleared pillboxes and cave entrances. Yet, the Americans recognized a gap: night operations. Darkness was the defenders' ally, and countless patrols had reported ambushes that left U.S. soldiers scrambling in confusion. The solution would come in the form of something entirely new: a rifle that could see in the shadows, turning the Japanese advantage into a vulnerability. Even before that technology arrived, every inch of Okinawa was contested. The Japanese forces engaged in harrowing night raids, often slipping past forward American lines with ghost-like precision. These attacks left small groups of U.S. soldiers pinned down in the rice paddies or forced to abandon forward positions. Officers on both sides recorded in their reports the toll exacted by darkness alone: panic, hesitation, and death lurking in unseen corners. By the time the first wave of U.S. night patrols advanced into the interior, the psychological stakes were clear. Every soldier knew the risk of an unseen opponent. And yet, for the Japanese, no one could have imagined the technological leap the Americans were about to deploy, a weapon that would turn night into day and change the calculus of survival on Okinawa forever. In these initial stages, the island itself seemed to conspire with the defenders. Thick brush muffled footsteps. Jagged ridges created natural kill zones. Hidden tunnels allowed forces to appear and vanish at will. The Americans pressed forward methodically, using artillery to soften positions before infantry moved in. Still, casualties were high. Every patrol learned that familiarity with terrain and darkness could equal firepower. And so, Okinawa became the proving ground not just for men but for technology. The M1 and M2 Carbines were already in U.S. arsenals, light and reliable, favored by airborne and support troops. But night fighting demanded more than a well-balanced rifle. It required vision where eyes could not penetrate. And by April 1945, the stage was set for a confrontation that would stun Japanese forces and redefine what it meant to fight in darkness. The soldiers crouched in the grass, the moon hiding behind clouds. Somewhere in the hills, a patrol moved unseen. Soon, a rifle would shine where no star could, and the world would glimpse the lethal potential of sight without light. The M1 Carbine had been conceived in the early years of the war as a lightweight alternative to the heavier M1 Garand. Designed by Winchester in 1941, it was compact, reliable, and easy to handle. A perfect weapon for support troops, paratroopers, and officers who needed mobility over raw firepower. Unlike the Garand's 8-round N-block clip, the carbine carried 15 rounds, and its .30 caliber ammunition was light enough for extended patrols without exhausting the soldier. By 1944, the carbine had proven its value in Europe and the Pacific. Soldiers praised its accuracy at short to medium ranges, its low recoil, and its speed of fire. Yet, the battlefield was evolving. In the dense jungles of the Philippines, and soon on the ridges and sugarcane fields of Okinawa, American troops confronted a lethal enemy who thrived in darkness. Night operations exposed a vulnerability. While U.S. firepower dominated daylight engagements, darkness rendered even the most disciplined units blind. Enter the M2 Carbine, an evolution designed to address these tactical gaps. Chambered in the same .30 caliber round but capable of selective fire, it gave troops a higher rate of fire when needed. Engineers focused not only on mechanical reliability, but also on adaptability, leaving open the possibility of integrating emerging technologies, including infrared sighting systems that could pierce the night. The M3 Carbine, commonly referred to as the Sniperscope carbine, was the culmination of these efforts. Developed in 1944, it combined the compact M2 Carbine with an infrared scope, a device that converted thermal radiation into a visible image on a cathode ray tube inside the sight. Soldiers carrying the M3 were equipped with a bulky battery pack strapped to their backs, providing enough power for limited night operations. The scope's range was modest, but within 30 to 40 yards, it gave the American infantry an almost supernatural advantage, the ability to see without being seen. Training for the M3 was limited, but select units understood its potential immediately. Patrols in Okinawa began experimenting with night insertions, moving quietly through enemy positions. Reports describe Japanese soldiers appearing as luminous silhouettes against the darkened terrain, their movements precise, yet tragically exposed. The first test deployments in early April 1945 confirmed the weapon's lethality. Entire patrols could be neutralized before they realized they were engaged. For the Japanese, accustomed to using darkness as a shield, this was unthinkable. Diaries and post-war interviews record a mix of disbelief and terror. Troops who had relied on stealth and intimate knowledge of terrain now faced unseen enemies who could penetrate the night with surgical precision. Even experienced officers found themselves second-guessing routine night maneuvers, wary of phantom shooters appearing from nowhere. From a logistical standpoint, the M3 Carbine posed challenges. The battery packs were heavy, requiring careful management to prevent failures in combat. The scopes were fragile and needed careful handling. Yet, the tactical advantage outweighed the drawbacks. The Americans had turned technology into a force multiplier, and in doing so had rewritten the rules of infantry engagement. Okinawa, in these final weeks of April, became the proving ground for this new paradigm. While traditional battles raged across ridges and hills, quiet infiltrations by M3 teams systematically decimated Japanese patrols. The numbers were staggering. Within weeks, an estimated 150 cubic meters units had caused roughly 30% of all rifle-related deaths in U.S. reports, an unprecedented statistic for a single piece of technology in the Pacific theater. The island itself bore witness to this silent revolution. Night no longer belonged to the defender. Hidden caves, narrow paths, and dense brush, once ideal for ambushes, now illuminated enemy silhouettes. Every Japanese soldier moving under the cover of darkness risked exposure. Every patrol became a test of nerves. In retrospect, the introduction of the M3 Carbine marked the first successful deployment of combat night vision. It was a glimpse of modern warfare, where technology, not brute force alone, determined outcomes. And for Okinawa, it meant that the fight was no longer just about courage or training, but about who could control the unseen. The stage was set. The Americans had the weapon, the troops knew how to use it, and the Japanese had no defense against a rifle that could see in the dark. Soon, the battle would enter a phase that neither side had experienced before, where the night itself became a battlefield. The M3 Carbine was more than a rifle. It was a glimpse into the future of warfare. At first glance, it resembled any standard M2 carbine. Light, compact, and easy to handle. But mounted atop the receiver was a small, unassuming infrared scope, connected to a battery pack carried on the soldier's back. Through this device, the battlefield was transformed. Shapes previously hidden in darkness now glowed with an eerie luminescence. Human figures, enemy positions, and even small movements became visible to trained operators. The scope operated on the principle of detecting infrared radiation emitted by objects. Within 30 to 40 yards, a soldier could identify targets with uncanny precision. This technology neutralized one of the most basic advantages of night combat: concealment. What had once required skill, patience, and intuition now demanded only the ability to carry a battery and aim steadily. Yet, the system was not flawless. The battery packs were heavy, limiting mobility during extended operations. The scope's range was short, forcing patrols into close encounters. Weather, rain, and dense vegetation could reduce effectiveness. Despite these limitations, the M3 offered a revolutionary edge. It allowed infantry to dominate in conditions that had always favored the defender. In the jungles and ridges of Okinawa, it was a literal game-changer, turning darkness into a tactical liability for the Japanese. From a broader perspective, the M3 foreshadowed the role of electronics in modern combat. It marked the first time that a rifle coupled with technology could give soldiers an advantage invisible to the naked eye. It was a quiet revolution, one that left traditional military doctrines scrambling to adjust. For the soldiers wielding the M3 Carbine, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Night operations, which had long been fraught with fear and uncertainty, suddenly offered confidence. Marines and Army troops reported moving through enemy territory with a sense of invincibility, able to see threats before the threats saw them. A single M3 operator could cover a wide perimeter, protecting entire squads from ambushes. On the other side, the Japanese defenders were unprepared for the terror of unseen rifles. Accounts describe soldiers frozen in place, unable to comprehend how bullets found them in total darkness. Ambushes that would have relied on stealth and surprise were now neutralized with ruthless efficiency. Diaries from Japanese officers recall a mix of disbelief and horror. Men vanishing without warning, no tracer or muzzle flash to mark the attack, only the sudden impact of bullets. This human dimension extended beyond fear. Night operations had always demanded discipline and nerves of steel, and now both sides faced a psychological arms race. American soldiers carrying the M3 had to resist overconfidence, understanding that the battery could fail or that multiple enemy combatants could overwhelm them. Japanese troops, meanwhile, had to adapt or perish, often relying on instinct and intuition to navigate terrain now illuminated by an invisible observer. The presence of the M3 reshaped combat behavior. Patrols became shorter but more deliberate. Sentries moved with heightened vigilance. Units altered their routines to avoid exposure. Each engagement was no longer just a test of marksmanship but a confrontation with technology that transformed fear into a tangible, visible threat. The emotional weight of these encounters cannot be understated. Soldiers on both sides endured mental strain that would linger long after the battle ended. For the Americans, it was a validation of innovation and ingenuity, a rare moment of certainty in a brutal campaign. For the Japanese, it was a chilling realization. The advantage of terrain and darkness had been stripped away. The deployment of the M3 Carbine fundamentally altered U.S. night fighting tactics on Okinawa. Prior to its introduction, night patrols relied on stealth, flares, and cautious movement. Soldiers moved slowly through sugarcane fields and ridges, acutely aware that a single misstep could trigger a deadly ambush. The Japanese had mastered these conditions, using the cover of darkness to infiltrate positions and attack vulnerable units. With the M3, patrols gained an unprecedented advantage. Small teams could operate independently, moving quietly through enemy-held terrain while maintaining visual dominance over the battlefield. The scope allowed soldiers to identify Japanese positions, distinguish friend from foe, and engage targets with lethal precision. Entire ambushes were neutralized before the attackers realized they were seen. Night raids, once a tool of terror for the Japanese, were systematically countered. Patrols could sweep areas methodically, eliminating threats while maintaining surprise. Platoon commanders reported a dramatic reduction in casualties during night operations, and the use of M3 teams became a standard tactic. Okinawa's rugged terrain, once favoring the defender, now amplified the power of technology in the hands of well-trained American soldiers. Commanders on both sides quickly recognized the implications of this new capability. U.S. officers, from company leaders to division commanders, began planning operations around M3-equipped teams. Reports emphasized the rifle's ability to secure forward positions, protect flanks, and disrupt enemy movements before conventional firepower was deployed. Small unit tactics adapted rapidly. Night patrols were prioritized, coordination with artillery became more precise, and reconnaissance benefited from the ability to see without revealing position. For Japanese leaders, the impact was demoralizing. Lieutenant General Ushijima and his staff struggled to counter a threat that defied traditional strategy. Nighttime harassment tactics, previously a reliable method of inflicting casualties, now resulted in devastating losses. Commanders resorted to dispersing troops, fortifying caves, and increasing sentry rotations, but these measures could not fully compensate for an enemy that could see in darkness. The psychological burden of invisible adversaries weighed heavily, forcing adjustments in deployment, timing, and risk assessment that undermined morale and effectiveness. The ethical dimension of the M3 Carbine was as complex as its technology. For U.S. soldiers, the rifle offered safety and superiority, but also introduced a disquieting element: the ability to kill unseen, often without warning. Unlike traditional firefights where combatants faced one another directly, night operations with the M3 removed visual contact, creating a one-sided dynamic that blurred familiar rules of engagement. Japanese accounts described the terror of being hunted by invisible shooters. Soldiers would freeze, uncertain where bullets might come from, or whether their comrades had been hit. Some American reports reflect a sense of unease, acknowledging the unnaturalness of the technology. It was precise, effective, but removed from the human eye-to-eye confrontation that many associated with honorable combat. Historians note that this ethical tension foreshadowed debates over future warfare, where distance, automation, and electronics increasingly replaced direct confrontation. The M3 Carbine, in essence, was not just a technological breakthrough, it was a moral inflection point. Night, long considered neutral ground, now became a weaponized dimension, and soldiers had to reconcile their humanity with the power of unseen lethality. April 1945. The Battle of Okinawa had entered its most ferocious stage. Hills and ridges smoked from artillery barrages, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of explosives. Japanese forces, entrenched in caves and fortified positions, had long relied on the cover of night to regroup and counterattack. But now, the Americans had introduced a weapon that nullified darkness itself. 150 M3 carbines had been issued to select units, their operators trained for stealth and precision. Each soldier carried a battery pack and the infrared scope, a cumbersome but deadly combination. At night, these teams became hunters in a land that had always favored the hunted. In the shadowed valleys near Shuri, Japanese patrols moved cautiously along narrow paths. They had learned to trust the cover of moonless nights, confident that U.S. positions were blind. That confidence shattered when the first M3 team advanced silently through the cane fields. Through the scope, American soldiers saw glowing outlines of enemy movement. The first shots were fired with clinical efficiency. Soldiers reported the surreal experience of watching figures appear, move, and vanish in the darkness, their every action illuminated by technology. Entire patrols were neutralized before they could alert nearby forces. The Japanese had faced artillery, machine guns, and grenades, but never a rifle that allowed its wielder to see what the human eye could not. The battlefield metrics were staggering. Within weeks, after multiple night engagements, U.S. reports attributed roughly 30% of all rifle-related Japanese deaths to M3 teams. This was unprecedented. A single technological innovation influencing nearly a third of combat outcomes in a major engagement. Infantry officers lauded the weapon, while commanders began rethinking operational priorities around its deployment. These night operations did more than inflict casualties. They sowed confusion and fear among Japanese troops. Ambushes that had once relied on stealth were now exploited by American precision. Sentries, who would normally patrol confidently under darkness, became hesitant, second-guessing every sound and shadow. The psychological advantage of the M3 was as potent as its firepower. In one documented engagement near the Kakazu Ridge, a Japanese squad of 30 men attempted a night infiltration of an American perimeter. Unaware of the M3 operators lying in wait, they moved into the kill zone. Within minutes, 15 were incapacitated or killed, while the remainder retreated in panic. After-action reports noted the absence of visible muzzle flashes and the complete surprise, emphasizing the revolutionary nature of the weapon. American troops, too, were changed by these encounters. Confidence soared, but so did the intensity of vigilance required to maintain the system. Operators moved deliberately, scanning every shadow, aware that battery failures or mechanical faults could instantly reverse their advantage. Each engagement demanded concentration, discipline, and nerve. Yet for the infantry, the payoff was clear. Night was no longer a threat, it was a tactical ally. Beyond individual skirmishes, the presence of M3 teams reshaped strategic considerations. Planners began scheduling assaults and patrols around the availability of infrared-equipped units. Night became a domain of calculated, controlled aggression rather than unpredictable danger. In effect, the M3 transformed Okinawa's battle rhythm, forcing Japanese commanders to alter plans in ways that could not fully compensate for an enemy that could see without light. The stage was set for a deadly crescendo. Across ridges, valleys, and fortified caves, Japanese forces confronted a silent, unseen enemy, armed with a weapon that rendered darkness obsolete. Every movement was now observed, every approach vulnerable, every night patrol a gamble against technology itself. As the weeks of April stretched into May, the combined effects of lethal precision, psychological terror, and tactical dominance began to shift the battle's momentum. What had once been a desperate, attritional fight now tilted unmistakably in favor of the Americans, not simply through numbers or firepower, but through the transformative edge of innovation. By May 1945, the impact of the M3 Carbine on Okinawa was undeniable. Reports from the front lines documented an unsettling reality for Japanese forces. Night no longer provided cover. Small patrols that once moved confidently through sugarcane fields and cave-riddled ridges now vanished before they could react. The numbers spoke for themselves. U.S. intelligence and after-action reports attributed approximately 30% of rifle-related Japanese casualties during this phase of the battle to M3 equipped teams. A remarkable statistic for a single technological innovation. One of the most striking examples occurred near the Shuri Line, the island's central defensive network. Japanese soldiers attempted repeated night infiltrations to harass American positions and supply lines. Each attempt was met with near-invisible precision. Operators reported glowing silhouettes of enemy figures moving in formation. A single squad of 8 M3 operators, working in pairs, could disrupt a force of 20 or more, forcing retreats and inflicting casualties that traditional night patrols could not have achieved. Commanders noted that these engagements were as much psychological victories as physical ones. the enemy's confidence in night operations was shattered. Individual accounts from American soldiers illustrate the surreal nature of these encounters. One Marine described crouching in a crater, watching Japanese patrols shimmer like ghostly shadows in the green glow, and realizing that they had no chance to strike first. Another reported that even seasoned NCOs, veterans of Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima, were stunned by the clarity the scope provided. The rifle transformed every night skirmish into a controlled engagement, allowing operators to take decisive action without exposing themselves. For Japanese troops, the effect was profound and demoralizing. Diaries and post-war testimonies reveal a recurring theme: confusion and fear. Soldiers reported sudden, silent deaths, comrades disappearing without warning, and an unshakable sense of being hunted by unseen enemies. The tactical advantage extended beyond immediate casualties. Entire operations had to be delayed or rerouted, and officers were forced to increase the dispersion of units, often weakening overall defensive cohesion. Strategically, the M3's deployment forced commanders on both sides to adapt rapidly. U.S. officers began assigning M3 teams to critical junctions, observation points, and high-risk infiltration zones. Night assaults were increasingly coordinated with M3 coverage, allowing conventional forces to move with reduced exposure. Conversely, Japanese leaders experimented with deception, camouflage, and nocturnal feints, but the advantage of night vision was difficult to counter. The cat-and-mouse dynamics of Okinawa were transformed into a one-sided contest, with Americans holding the unseen edge. The scale of deployment, though limited to 150 units, proved sufficient to influence the outcome of numerous engagements. Beyond raw statistics, the introduction of night vision shifted battlefield psychology. Japanese commanders reportedly believed they were under constant surveillance. Even minor movements were treated as potentially fatal. Troops hesitated where they would once have pressed forward. Patrols slowed to a crawl, and morale eroded under the weight of invisible observation. The effectiveness of the M3 also highlighted the future of warfare. Where traditional rifles required daylight, cover, and visual contact, infrared-equipped weapons allowed soldiers to dominate environments previously controlled by defenders. Okinawa became a testbed for this new reality, and the lessons learned would resonate far beyond the Pacific. Military engineers and tacticians noted the potential applications for future conflicts, foreshadowing the widespread adoption of night vision in Korea, Vietnam, and modern combat operations. Yet, the M3's impact was not limited to tactical superiority. The psychological dimension, the terror of unseen enemies, amplified its effectiveness. Japanese troops reported reluctance to conduct operations after dark, a hesitation that slowed maneuvers and disrupted coordinated defenses. In effect, the rifle was not only a weapon of fire but also a tool of intimidation, capable of shaping behavior and decision-making across entire units. As the battle reached its climax, the combination of lethal precision, morale disruption, and technological dominance crystallized. Okinawa, one of the bloodiest engagements of the Pacific War, had demonstrated for the first time that combat could be fundamentally altered by electronics. Where courage, terrain, and brute force once dictated survival, a small technological advantage now defined life and death. The stage was set for the aftermath, where we will explore how the M3 Carbines deployment shaped immediate post-battle reports, U.S. Army evaluations, and the long-term legacy of night vision in warfare. June 1945. Okinawa lay scarred and smoldering. Hillsides pockmarked with craters, villages reduced to rubble, and the air thick with the stench of death. The human cost was staggering. Over 12,000 American casualties, tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers dead, and countless civilians caught in the crossfire. Amid the carnage, the deployment of the M3 Carbine stood out as a revolutionary moment, a technological leap that would shape the understanding of infantry warfare for decades to come. U.S. after-action reports meticulously documented the rifle's performance. Officers praised its ability to transform night operations from a high-risk endeavor into a controlled, precise engagement. Patrols that once relied on stealth and intuition could now operate with confidence, identifying threats before being detected. Casualty reports confirmed its lethality. M3 teams were responsible for an estimated 30% of rifle-related Japanese deaths, a remarkable figure given the limited number of units deployed. Soldiers who wielded the M3 recalled its combination of awe and trepidation. The rifle was heavy, and the battery packs cumbersome, but the payoff in tactical advantage was undeniable. Operators moved deliberately, scanning darkened terrain with an almost clinical detachment. Reports highlight how these teams could hold key positions, cover flanks, and execute night raids that previously would have required entire platoons. Even with its successes, the rifle exposed limitations. Battery life constrained operations to short periods, and dense vegetation could obscure targets beyond the effective range of the scope. Operators had to balance aggression with patience, aware that overextending could leave them vulnerable. Nevertheless, the advantages far outweighed these challenges. Commanders began to plan night operations around M3 availability, assigning units to critical positions and high-risk patrols. Japanese forces, in contrast, faced disorientation and fear. After-action notes captured the shock among troops encountering the unseen enemy. Night patrols that had been routine became fraught with danger. Sentries and forward positions were abandoned or reinforced in response to losses, slowing operational tempo and forcing leaders to rethink strategy. Psychological strain became a weapon in itself. Hesitation and uncertainty amplified the M3's impact beyond its physical firepower. Technical evaluations conducted post-battle confirmed the rifle's significance. Engineers and tacticians noted that the M3 represented a leap in infantry capability, a weapon that integrated electronic vision into a standard firearm. While primitive by modern standards, the infrared scope marked the first successful combat use of night vision technology, foreshadowing its central role in future conflicts. Lessons learned on Okinawa informed development programs for Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, where night operations would continue to challenge conventional tactics. The battlefield itself bore silent testimony. Key ridges and valleys where M3 teams had operated were later mapped and referenced in training manuals, highlighting the tactical advantages of night vision in both offensive and defensive operations. Commanders studied the data carefully, recognizing that control of darkness could dictate the outcome of engagements as decisively as firepower or terrain. As the island was secured, the U.S. Army began cataloging the operational lessons of Okinawa. Reports emphasized that technology, training, and integration were equally vital. A weapon, no matter how innovative, required skilled operators and coordinated tactics to achieve its full potential. The M3 Carbine, though deployed in limited numbers, had already proven that the invisible advantage could become the decisive factor in modern combat. With Okinawa secured and the war in the Pacific drawing toward its final act, military analysts turned their attention to the lessons of night combat. The M3 Carbine, though deployed in only 150 units, had demonstrated a transformative capability, the ability to dominate the battlefield in darkness. Its performance validated the integration of electronic technology into infantry weapons and foreshadowed a new era of warfare. U.S. Army evaluations emphasized both the tactical and psychological effects. Patrols using the M3 reported fewer casualties and higher mission success rates during night operations. Commanders began revising doctrine, stressing the importance of reconnaissance, night patrols, and the coordination of M3-equipped units with conventional infantry. In essence, a small technological advantage had amplified operational effectiveness across multiple levels. The Japanese, meanwhile, were forced to confront the reality of an opponent capable of seeing in the dark. Post-war accounts revealed disbelief and astonishment. Officers described how Okinawa's defenders, previously confident in nocturnal maneuvers, now faced an enemy who could detect and eliminate threats silently and with precision. The M3 Carbine was not just a weapon. It was a psychological disruptor, one that eroded confidence, slowed operational tempo, and forced defensive adjustments that could never fully compensate for the advantage. In the broader scope of military history, the M3's deployment marked the first combat use of night vision rifles. The lessons learned shaped subsequent developments in Korea and Vietnam, where infrared and low-light systems would become standard in specialized units. Engineers refined scope optics, increased battery life, and developed more portable designs, all building on the prototype battlefield experiences from Okinawa. The principle was clear: control of visibility and by extension information, could be as decisive as numerical superiority or firepower. Beyond doctrine and design, Okinawa influenced training and strategy. Infantry units were instructed in night operations with an understanding that the unseen could become the decisive element. The integration of technology required discipline, coordination, and rigorous practice. Officers emphasized that electronic advantage alone was insufficient. Success depended on the human operator's skill, judgment, and composure under pressure. The M3 Carbine, therefore, became both a tool and a catalyst for a new operational mindset. Okinawa also illuminated the ethical and psychological dimensions of modern warfare. Soldiers contended with the disquieting reality of unseen killing. The eerie precision of the M3 removed the mutual vulnerability that had long defined infantry combat. For Japanese forces, the experience reinforced a sense of inevitability. The technological gap could determine outcomes even before the first shot was fired. The battlefield had changed, and the psychological edge conferred by electronic vision was as real as any physical advantage. In the years following World War II, the M3 Carbine became a footnote in official histories but a foundational moment in the evolution of combat optics. Its legacy endured in the development of night vision scopes, infrared targeting systems, and the eventual digitalization of battlefield awareness. Okinawa had been the first proving ground for these concepts, demonstrating that a relatively small technological innovation could have disproportionate effects on strategy, morale, and combat outcomes. As the smoke cleared over Okinawa, the lessons were clear. Dominance was no longer solely measured by numbers or terrain. In the crucible of battle, the ability to see what the enemy could not, to control the unseen, had become a decisive factor. From that point onward, technology would reshape the rules of engagement, setting the stage for the modern soldier and the battles that lay ahead. Okinawa, in its final months, was more than a battle. It was a turning point in the evolution of combat. Amid the hills and sugarcane fields, men fought with courage, skill, and desperation. Yet it was not valor alone that tipped the scales, it was innovation. The M3 Carbine, small in number but revolutionary in effect, transformed the darkness from a shield into a liability, reshaping the battlefield in ways that few had imagined. The human element remained central. Soldiers on both sides faced fear, uncertainty, and the raw consequences of warfare. For the Americans, the rifle offered safety and dominance, but also introduced the unsettling reality of unseen lethality. For the Japanese, night, once a sanctuary, became a space of vulnerability and dread. The psychological weight of this invisible engagement was as decisive as any bullet fired. In the quiet aftermath, historians would recognize Okinawa not just for its staggering casualties, but for the dawn of a new era, one where technology could see what the human eye could not, and where mastery over information became as critical as firepower or terrain. The M3 Carbine foreshadowed the future of combat, from Korea to Vietnam, and ultimately to the digital battlefields of today, where visibility, reconnaissance, and precision guide strategy as surely as courage in numbers. Yet, the story of Okinawa is also a reminder of the human cost behind innovation. Every technological advantage was measured in lives. The Japanese soldiers who fell unseen, the Americans navigating the ethical weight of their newfound power. Warfare, it became clear, would always be a collision of human courage and technological ingenuity, of fear and calculation, of life and death. In the end, the M3 Carbine was more than a rifle. It was a symbol of transformation, of vision overcoming darkness, of ingenuity shaping destiny, of the battlefield entering a new dimension. Okinawa had been its proving ground, and from those scorched ridges and silent nights, the modern age of warfare was quietly born.